Until 3, this is 4BC Afternoons with Carla Binyaska.
All right, welcome back to the afternoons program here on 4BC and 4RO in Rockhampton. Is it just me, or the sleeping with your childhood teddy, is that an ick? That's an ick for me. That's something that is just not right. But MAFS is making me question the close bond that people have with their family members. In this particular case on MAFS, it's Joel, who's a 31-year-old man who sleeps with his childhood teddy bear still lays across his mum's lap for back scratches. It feels like the umbilical cord has not been cut there, and it would be very unusual. And as Daniel rightly has texted in, you know, try dating in your mid-30s with idiots that are trying to emulate what they see on these shows. Look, and I understand these shows are cast for these types of people. They're not going on there for love. Some of them might be. I know a couple who met on MAFS, but it was the first season, and therein lies the thing. Once the first season goes to air, then everyone wants to jump on the bandwagon and think they can use it to, you know, leverage a career or whatever else, and maybe they're not in it for the right intentions. But you're right, what we see on our screens, what we see on social media does sort of set us up. But we're seeing a guy here who is a very, very close relationship with his mum, and it's fascinating to me and it's almost strange. Joining us to explain when it's time to officially cut that metaphorical umbilical cord is Clinical Director of North Brisbane Psychologist, Dr. Rachel Hannam. Hello, Rachel. Thanks for joining us on Afternoons.
Hi, Carla. Thanks for having me.
We've basically... we're talking about this 31-year-old Joel, this 31-year-old man whose mum bragged about the fact that he hasn't grown up. In your line of work, what goes through your mind when you see a dynamic like that?
Yeah, well, I don't know these people or anything about the case, but it certainly sounds like it's a sign or a symptom of an enmeshed relationship and a sort of arrested development, as we used to call it in old school psychology. You know, our developmental task as children is to become more and more independent and, you know, cultivate a sense of self. And our job as mothers is to appropriately guide our children through their developmental tasks so that by the time they reach adulthood, they're not too reliant on us either emotionally or practically. And, you know, we can still love them, but see them as a separate individual, and that's called individuation. And I hear this story and I think, well, he has not individuated very well from his mother. Yes. No,
I think the interesting dynamic in this case in particular is the fact that the mother is also a psychologist. That aside, when that sort of
just are humans too, and we're all different.
Yes.
And she hasn't individuated from her son because it's just as much the task of the parent to let go of their child, and there's some grief in that sometimes. But for some reason, she hasn't been able to do that.
How do you mitigate that grief? Because I mean, my son is only 3 and he needs me for now.
Yes.
I feel he's going to be way independent though. But how do you mitigate that grief? Because it's on the horizon. We can see that we've got to let them do their own thing. And hopefully that's your job done is, you know, developing and growing a human to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and be resilient and make their own choices and live by them.
Yes, exactly. Well, I've talked to many women whose children are older now, whether they're, you know, 10 or 20, and they look at photos of when they were 3 and they feel sad because they'll never be 3 again. And that's a very legitimate grief. That time of life has passed and it will never return. But for myself, what I do as a mother of 3 children is, you know, the youngest of whom is 15, is I say, well, they're all on their own journey now, and it's really important that they struggle and figure things out for themselves. And I can hold both my, you know, bittersweet sort of sadness that those childhood days are gone with my desire to see them live their life, have their journey. And I sometimes share with mothers, parents, the metaphor of the emperor moth and the modern day parable of the scientist watching the emperor moth emerge from its cocoon. And it was taking so long and the moth was struggling so much that the scientist decided to get his scalpel and just help the moth out of the cocoon. But by doing so, the moth had not pushed the fluid from its body into the wings, and its wings were not strong, and it couldn't fly away. And it's a great sort of image for we need to let our children have their struggles so they can learn and get stronger and get wiser. That is part of the process. It's not always easy.
how it's not always easy, but it's important, particularly when those kids then have to grow up and be adults and, members of society and then have relationships themselves. Because I know that I've been in relationships in the past where the mother in particular has felt like the third wheel, has felt like the third person in the relationship, and you cannot compete with someone like that.
Absolutely. We cannot choose our adult children's partners for them. We can care for them without holding ourselves responsible for their happiness. Differentiation or individuation says, I love you, but I'm not you, and you're not me, and you're on your own journey. And it is such a fine line for us to walk as parents between, loving our children and wanting to be there for them and support them, and back off and let them figure things out for themselves so they get more resilient. And that will, of course, mean there's pushback and sometimes conflict from either side. So we need to expect some tension or conflict in that individuation process. And we do the best we can, but we try to remind ourselves that they'll only become resilient and independent if they go through things for themselves.
I guess, we all want a good relationship, Dr. Rachel, with our parents and particularly in our parents-in-laws. But is there an actual line between being, I guess, a close family and having one of these unhealthy, enmeshed families that you talk about?
Yeah. Well, I think we're all different, and our boundaries around time and energy and involvement will be different for different people. So you might have a mother who wants more involvement and to spend more time with you than you want and are willing to. And yeah, that's tricky because you're allowed to want what you want. She's allowed to want what she wants. And the truth will lie somewhere in the middle, and it will require negotiation.
Compromise.
Because if just one, and compromise, if one person gets their way, then the other person's feelings and needs are being ignored and sidelined. And that doesn't work out well in the long run.
I guess then what's a very polite way, if you see some of these red flags, to cut that umbilical cord?
Yeah, well, I think that, being rude and abrupt and obnoxious is not the way, because it doesn't contain the useful info. We want to convey something useful.
All right, so don't go on MAFS is what you're saying, Dr. Rachel.
I know a lot of people who love that show. I've only seen snippets. I find it fascinating, but kind of tragic if we're taking any sort of guidance
in real life.
These people in real life. But I'm a bit old school. So I think that, when we're getting unsolicited advice from our parent, we might say, thanks for caring. I'll have a think about it. We don't have to be rude. We can gently push back by saying, I need to think about that, or I want something different. I love you, but it's my life, and it takes a long time. I say to my clients, individuation is a lifelong project. I've worked with people whose parents are dead, and they're still trying to
cut that cord.
Cut that cord and not need their parents' approval so much.
All right, very quickly, lastly, in 10 seconds, how old is too old to be sleeping with your childhood teddy?
Look, I don't know the meaning. It'll be a case-by-case basis, but I would say, by 30, it's probably time to let it go.
It's time. Okay. Dr. Rachel Hannam, thank you so much for your time here. North Brisbane Psychologists is where we can find you. We really appreciate your time and afternoons.
Thanks. Thanks, Carla.
Dr. Rachel, we'll take a quick break. Back after this.